This video is part 3 of the Measurements Lab. So far, you should have completed the scientific notation review and the conversions portion of the lab. This video will look at some of the equipment we will use in the lab. First, we will look at length. The base unit for length are meters. These linear measurements tell us how long objects are. Meter sticks, rulers, measuring tapes can be used to measure length. So always be sure to measure in metrics, so meters, centimeters, millimeters, not in inches, yards, or feet for scientific courses. So here's a picture of a puppy, and we are going to measure how tall he is. Just remember that when you take your measuring stick, you're always going to make sure you line it up starting with the 0 at the very bottom. Always make sure the 0 is at the very bottom of what you're measuring, and then go across to the top and make sure you're taking accurate readings. So this puppy is 7 centimeters tall. The second type of measurement we will look at is mass. Mass is a measure of the amount of matter in an object, and the mass will remain the same no matter where you are. Remember, weight is the measure of gravity's pull on the mass of an object. This means that if the amount of gravity changes, then the weight will also change. So to measure mass, we're going to use a scale. At Wake Tech, we are lucky enough to have digital scales. Before you measure using this scale, you should always zero it by pressing the zero or tare button. After zeroing, you will get a more accurate reading from the digital scale. If you are measuring liquids or objects that like to roll around, you need to put a container on your scale first. You should place your container on the scale and then zero it again, so press that 0 button. This will cause the scale to ignore the mass of the container. Now you can add whatever substance you like to your container and you will get the mass of just that substance. So we could measure water, a marble, whatever you like, and the scale will ignore the mass of the container and do the math for you. I would like you guys to practice with a digital scale now. So pause the video, look in your handout, and there's a link to a digital scale online. Your handout asks you to record the mass of certain objects that you'll find in that tutorial. So complete that and be ready to turn that information into me in lab on January 29th. Volume is a measure of the amount of space an object takes up. When measuring volume, there's a variety of types of equipment we can use. Some equipment is more precise, giving us a more accurate measurement. To get a more precise measurement, you need to look for a piece of equipment that has more lines or gradations on it. For example, for measuring 100 milliliters of water, you will be more accurate if you use a graduated cylinder rather than a beaker. So look at that graduated cylinder. It has a lot more gradations on it, giving us a more precise measurement. When reading a measurement out of a graduated cylinder, we need to remember that water is sticky. So when you put water into the graduated cylinder, it will stick to the sides of the container, making a dip or curve in the line that we call a meniscus. Always be sure to bring your eyes level to the graduated cylinder and read the water line at the bottom of that meniscus. This will give you the most accurate measurement. In your lab manual, in the volume section, there are actually some practice problems with this, so make sure you go in there and read those pictures and record the volume of water in those graduated cylinders. Make sure you read them correctly at the bottom of the meniscus. So, to measure smaller amounts of fluid in the lab, we'll use pipettes. For the most part, we will use disposable pipettes. So these are little plastic things that can be thrown away when we're done. Always make sure that you check the marks on your pipettes before you measure. There are several sizes of disposable pipettes. Some of them read 1 milliliter and others hold up to 3 milliliters. So you need to know what you're measuring before you just suck up some fluid and empty it into your containers. So for the crime scene lab, we will actually use even smaller amounts, so we will have to use a micro pipette at that time. So we'll cover the how-tos and rules of micro pipettes later in another lab, but this is what those look like. In many labs, we will also use different types of holding glassware, so things like test tubes and microcentrifuge tubes to hold our fluids as we mix them or transfer them or run experiments. Last but not least, we have temperature measurements in this lab as well. So temperature is a measure of the intensity of heat, and heat just measures molecular movement. So the metric unit for temperature is degrees centigrade or degrees Celsius. So make sure you guys are reading the correct side of a thermometer whenever you look at these measurements in lab. Many of our thermometers have both Celsius and Fahrenheit on them, and in this lab we want to make sure we're reading in metrics. So here's an example of a thermometer. Again, this one has Celsius and Fahrenheit on it. We can see that when we're looking at the metric system, freezing point for degrees Celsius is 0 degrees Celsius, so very convenient, easy to remember. And then the boiling point for water is actually 100 degrees Celsius. So again, this is easier numbers to remember. If we look at the degrees Fahrenheit, freezing is 32 degrees Fahrenheit, and boiling is actually 212, so a little bit kind of random numbers in between there. And our metric system standardizes this and gives us easier numbers to remember. So at the end of your handout, there are 3 examples of thermometers. I'd like you guys to take a reading on those and record that on your handout to turn in to me next lab. Also at the end of that handout are some pictures. So this is a little activity for you guys to just name these pieces of equipment that we went over today. So make sure you can name those and recognize them for lab next week as well.